if I had pockets on this dress, this would be the state pocket, and the money would be rolling out of there. This pocket would be the renters or the homeowners in the state, and there'd be no money in there, particularly for the renters, because they would be putting all of their money from this pocket into their rental costs. Why am I here today? Penny and Bruce and Sheila called me about 2 months ago and asked me if I would talk about a new program that we implemented in the state of North Dakota back in 2011. It was a way to put money from that pocket, from that left pocket, over back into that right pocket, reduce those rental costs for our low to moderate income people in the state. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. They asked me to specifically talk about the Housing Incentive Fund, how it got started, why it was needed, the mechanics of the program, and about partnerships. Okay. A program that I think is extremely successful in the state of North Dakota. Can it be replicated in Montana? I think so. And so hopefully by the end of my presentation today, you'll have an idea of how our program works, and you can make that decision as to whether or not it's something to look for in your state. First of all, a little bit about the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. We are a sister agency to the Montana Board of Housing. And I guess with saying that, Bruce is my brother then, because what do? We provide low-cost mortgages for first-time homebuyers, similar to what the Montana Board of Housing does. We have a planning and housing development division that works on the affordable side, both home ownership as well as the creation of new single-family homes, particularly in rural areas. And then we have a division that monitors compliance on our low-income housing tax credit projects that we put money in either through HUD, through the federal government with the low-income housing tax credit programs, or with our HIF program. We are overseen by a 6-member advisory board and the Industrial Commission. So unlike a Montana Board of Housing that is overseen by the Department of Commerce, I believe, we answer to the governor, the attorney general, and the Ag Commissioner. They comprise the Industrial Commission, so those are my 3 bosses. As a state agency, we cannot lobby. So we cannot go out there and try to advance a program and get it through legislature. We can support a private initiative, but we can't introduce a bill to create a program. So how did the Housing Incentive Fund, HIF, get started? Back in 2008, there was a very loosely formed organization of people that wanted to create a housing trust fund. Somebody in the audience asked about, I think it was you, about housing for the very low income, the people on fixed income, the people with disabilities. That was the group of people that formed that initial entity to try to create that housing for persons with disabilities and other very low income. It was primarily service providers. They got legislative sponsorship, introduced a bill back in 2009, and they wanted $10 million for a housing trust fund. That bill never made it out of committee. What am I doing wrong?
Nope, I'm just going to get the stuff you want.
Okay, thank you. You'll know I don't like to stand still, so never made it out of committee. Our legislature meets every 2 years. So nothing happened then until close to, well, 2010. That very loosely formed group went back to the drawing board. They formed something called the Housing Alliance of North Dakota, a little tighter group, a little more lobbying power within that group. Again, a lot of advocacy on behalf of the persons with disabilities. The Medicaid infrastructure grant was one of the primary funding tools for that, for the activity of hand. They drafted and secured sponsorship of a bill that went to the 2011 legislative session. Let's see what's here. The legislature was more receptive to it then. That was when the oil activity was really starting to take effect in the state, they were willing to talk about, a role that the state might play in housing. They did authorize, ultimately at the end of 2011, they gave us $4 million. They did not give us cash. They gave us the ability to allocate tax credits, state income tax credits. There's some that say they still didn't really want to do anything about housing. They gave us credits thinking that we would never be able to generate dollars into the fund. So, it wasn't going to cost the state anything. I'm not that pessimistic. So that program became effective July 1st. We had $4 million, the ability to issue $4 million in credits. Still no dollars in the bank to actually create affordable housing. So we went to work through a public hearing process, developed an allocation plan. We awarded credits to developers, not dollars, because again, we had no money in the bank to actually allocate, so we allocated credits. So summer moved on. There tremendous outcry from the public about the lack of affordable housing in the state. You couldn't open a local newspaper, turn on a radio station or a TV without talk about somebody who was being displaced, about the lack of workers to fuel the economy. So the governor called a special legislative session in the fall of 2011. He recommended that fund from $4 million be increased to $15 million. Again, state credits only. We were extremely successful in getting contributions into that fund for that $15 million. And likewise, we had tremendous interest from developers to utilize that fund. And I'll talk a little bit about how those dollars flow in to the fund as well as how they flow out to developers. All right, so we had the $15 million fund, went through those dollars. Coming close to the 2013 legislative session, the governor put in his budget, he wanted that increased from $15 million to $50 million. He also didn't want us to have to wait until that $50 million was raised through contributions for the credits, because everybody knows tax credits are, people think credits at the end of the year, so generally that's when our contributions come into the fund. So he asked for a portion of that to be in the form of a general appropriation. At the end of the legislative session, we ended up with $35.4 million. And I'll talk a little bit again about the mentality within a legislative body about states' role in housing. So they said, well, we're not going to give you $50 million, we'll give you $35.4. It's doubling the fund, be happy with it, live with it. So we allocated the entire $35.4 million within the first 5 months of the biennium. No dollars now until our legislature meets again in 15. So essentially, we've lost a whole construction season dealing with housing. Housing is not getting any better. We are creating a lot of market rate housing in the state, particularly on the western side, but it's not affordable today. Rick talked, gave you some numbers about what the projections are. Those projections move basically every time a study is done as to what component of that workforce is going to be temporary as opposed to permanent. I will tell you that one of the biggest obstacles, even within the oil industry, what they tell us, they pay their workers well, but a lot of them are living in the crew camps. They tell us that in order to create a long-term happy employee, they need to have options to get them out of those work camps so that they can bring their families to the state. Now, as a state housing finance agency whose mission is affordable housing for low to moderate income, do we care about, the oil workers? Well, they're part of our economy. Somebody also asked the question about, are the oil companies doing their share? I will tell you that yes, in our state, generally they are. They're the ones putting the money into the fund. getting the credits. Yes, they get a dollar-for-dollar credit against their state income tax liability. But they are also, we believe, we don't know what their income tax liability is, but we believe based on the contributions that they are making, that they are putting into that fund well above and beyond what their actual state income tax liability is. Our oil companies are responsive. Not only are they helping on the housing side, they're buying the ambulances, they're funding schools, they, public facilities. They are doing their share. We appreciate them in the state. They're making us rich. All right, so this diagram, if you start way over at your left, so a contributor puts money into the fund, keeping in mind, again, out of that $35.4 million fund, $20 million of it is a credit component. They put $20 million in turn we issue them a certificate that says you contributed X number of dollars into the fund. That's the amount that you can take as a credit against your state income tax liability. So as an individual, if I look at my taxes and I go, okay, my liability last year was $1,000, that's what I think it's going to be this year. I make a $1,000 contribution into the fund. I show that as a credit when I file my tax return. I don't have to write a check out to the state tax department. Our legislature believes very strongly that there needs to be that local-state partnership. They're willing to do something for housing, but there needs to be that local buy-in. And so the local community, individuals, businesses can contribute for a project in their community. There's a slide that talks about it now, but I'll just mention that now. That's one of the things, as a contributor, you can designate a project, a community, or a region where you want your dollars to go to work. All right, so a developer, Don Sturhan, and I'll talk about his project in a little bit, from the Mountain Plains Group. He makes application for dollars from that $35.4 million fund. So we put the dollars out to the developer. If there would be any loan repayment, that would come back into the fund. But I'll talk a little bit again about how it's structured. We don't expect any dollars to come back in because our program, our dollars are truly intended to be soft dollars. All right, so I've talked a little bit about this. Benefits to the contributor. You can put your dollars to work where you live or do business. Our legislature made a change in the 2013 biennium. Before that, for the first biennium of the program, it was illegal for a contributor to benefit from that contribution. It was an anti-gifting issue. They made a legislative change such that an oil industry that made a contribution into a project in their community could have some of those units for their own employees. Keep in mind that when we fund a project, there's only a portion of the units that are affordable. The others can be market rate. That contributor, if it's a financial institution, it can benefit from CRA. Of the $20 million in credits, about $11.6 million of those contributions came in from financial institutions. The Wells Fargo, the US Bank, more regional banks, more local banks. They were very big contributors into the fund. The next group of contributors was oil-related industries. And third was corporations, local businesses, and finally the contributors, individuals. So again, we issue that certificate then that allows them to claim that credit. Developers apply for the program through quarterly funding rounds. We went through and had a public hearing process. We heard from the public how they wanted it structured. Point structure, we encourage lower income targeting. A typical housing incentive fund project will have some units at the very low income to try to get those fixed income people. It will have some more units at more of a moderate income, up to 140% of area median income. Essential service workers, that was new, a new mandate given to us in 2013. The legislature said, we don't want schools, cities, counties to be landlords. Somebody talked about, I think it was the panel that talked about the schools having to put up fourplexes for their teachers, counties having to put up buildings for their employees. Our legislature gave us the strong mandate that said, these people should not be in the housing business. That's distracting from their normal function. So, NDHFA, you must give priority to housing essential service workers. We define that as city, county, state workers, medical facility workers, within their law enforcement. That's a critical issue in North Dakota. The Highway Patrol, the local jurisdictions are not able to recruit and retain employees because they can't afford housing. So we took that to mean 51% of our fund must benefit those essential service workers. We put in 30% of the cost of the project. So if you've got a $6 million project, we'll put in $1.8 million. We then have control on 30% of the units. 30% of the units must have income and rent restrictions. We put a deed restriction on there that mandates those income and rent restrictions. We structure that 30% as a loan with no expectation that we're going to be getting any of that money back. It's structured as a loan simply to ensure compliance. If that project remains in compliance for the 15, and I say 15 plus years, because if the term of the permanent loan is a 20-year term, then our deed restriction, will be for 20 years. But if the project continues to rent 30% of the units for 15 or more years, our loan is forgiven. Prepayment, we don't allow prepayment to lift that deed restriction. They can prepay us, they can give us that $1.8 million back, but the deeds restriction is going to survive prepayment. That was something that we heard very loud and clear from our attendees at the public hearing, was that they didn't want state money to go in, allow the project to be able to be built, an oil company to come in, buy them out, and get rid of that deed restriction. So they've benefited from interest-free money. Prepayments will not work. We modeled it after the federal low-income housing tax credit program. For those of you that are familiar with that, we have less equity going in because we simply don't have the dollars that were available through the federal government. Utilizing that local-state partnership model. As far as what we've done, now this is called the HIF2. I'm talking about the 2013-2015 program. I didn't go back to what we did with the first 15 million. But we have created 922 additional housing units in the state. 223 of those will be market rate. 214 for essential service workers. 388 for Main Street employees. By there I'm talking about maybe the Menards employees or the Walmart employees or the people working in the hotel industry, the retail sector, bank employees, and then 93 units for the very low income disabled and elderly households. Bruce and Penny asked me to talk just a little bit about some of the other housing production programs. Similar to what they do, we administer the low-income housing tax credit program, which can be used in conjunction with HIF, but in a lesser amount. There we limit a project HIF dollars going in. We administer CDBG, or a home and CDBG are administered through our Department of Commerce, and then various HUD and USDA programs. Anyone who's worked with federal programs knows that there's a lot of red tape. The beauty of the HIF program is it is extremely simple. Any of our developers who use it say that it's very user-friendly. That's important because many of our developers are for-profit developers that say they're not touching affordable housing because they don't want that red tape with the federal programs. We've been successful in bringing in true market rate developers who are looking at our 30% equity as what they need when they go to the bank to take out that loan. So ours comes in as a soft equity. They don't have to put nearly, as much of their own money in, and the numbers work. Now, when I say that we've got some market rate units in there, we still monitor those. Our projects are not going to have $3,000 and $3,500 rents in there for those market rate units because we watch that cash flow. That could be another trigger for repayment, is if they propose to us, let's say we've got that typical project, our restrictive rents range from $500 to $1,000. They tell us that the other 70% are going to rent for, let's just say $1,800. That project cash flows at that. Now all of a sudden, again, they decide, they enter into a contract with an oil company, and the oil company says, I'll do a master lease on those, I'll give you $3,000 a month rent for those market rate units. Guess what? Now that project is throwing off excess cash flow. They don't need all of our money in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to recapture some of that on an annual basis as a percentage of cash flow, get our state dollars back and put them to work in other projects. We have another program in the state that's not administered through our agency, but we have a state bank, a state-owned bank. We're the only state in the nation that has a state-owned bank. They received the ability to do what's called FlexPace. It's the Affordable Housing FlexPace program. They will provide a interest rate subsidy up to $500,000 per project or $25,000 per unit. And what that does is it buys down the interest rate on that permanent debt up or down as low as 1%. So the state does matching on it. And depending on how long that $25,000 is going to stretch out, typically it's in that 5 to 7 years that it'll buy the debt down, depending on what the perm conventional rate was going into it. But that's a nice thing that we couple with our HIF program. So now you've got HIF equity of 30%, you've got a state match or state buy down on the interest rate, so we can truly create some affordable housing with those between those two programs. Okay, so my tips for success. If you are looking at creating something like this in the state of North Dakota, or state of Montana, I mean, engage as many partners as you can statewide. Whether this is an East issue, whether it's a state issue for us, it started out very much as a West issue for us in the Bakken. What we've seen is that there is spillover now across the state. People are moving further and further out of the Bakken to find that affordable housing. So it's truly a state issue. Plus, I'm guessing, again, Montana is similar to North Dakota. Maybe not, but North Dakota has an aging population. So our aging people are continuing to grow, which means we've got more and more people converting to fixed income, again, which means that we need that lower income housing statewide. If you are going to get something passed through the legislature, if you only have interest from your eastern legislators, guess what? The votes aren't going to be there. So you need to get statewide support, and whether that's through that advocacy for special needs housing, for seniors housing, however you can do it. Get buy-in from your governor. I worked at the agency for almost 30 years. I will say that our current governor is the most engaged governor that I have ever worked for. He truly understands the blending that has to happen between housing and economic development. Without adequate affordable housing, a community is not going to grow economically because you're not going to be able to recruit the workforce that you need to grow. He gets it. Know your needs. You are not going to be able to convince a legislator that you need affordable housing unless you can really quantify why you need it, how many units you need it, get their votes. What we did back in 2012 is our agency commissioned a statewide housing needs assessment. We paid about $140,000 for that. That was the start. That really got people's attention because that really quantified the need for those seniors, the need for those persons with disabilities. There's been multiple studies done since, and I will say that they have totally supported our housing needs, our statewide needs assessment, but they're dwarfing. The new studies are dwarfing that because that was based on what they knew at the time with the oil industry, and that oil industry has expanded. I feel like I'm going off here. Educate, educate, educate. Our legislature says, and there are still those up there that say that, housing is a private sector activity. If there's demand, developers will come in and put that housing in. And to a certain extent, that's true. If a developer can go into a community, get a 15% rate of return, pay off that debt in Western North Dakota in 5 to 7 years, and do that with a $3,000 or $3,500 rent, yes, they're going to put it in. But who are they serving? Are they serving the people that we in this room want to serve? The affordable sector of it? No. They're concerned that the state is going to play a role in creating a housing bubble. We are creating this whole section of these 922 units. The private sector is coming in and putting in $3,000 a month units. Where is that tipping point going to be where those $3,000 rents have to come down? And are they then going to be affordable? So that's something that we are continually trying to keep in mind is what's that level where the need to create affordable housing isn't there because the market demand or the supply is going to exceed the demand. I don't know, folks, what we're going to be going in to the 2015 legislature asking for in terms of dollar amounts to reauthorize HIF. That is something that we're continuing to monitor on a month-by-month basis to see what's happening out there in the industry. My latest conversation with the governor was delay that as long as possible. So around October, I'll present to him what I think that level should be. Whether it should be 50 or 75 or 100, I don't know what. But I need to make the case that the private sector is not creating affordable housing today, and the state needs to continue to play a role. And I believe there's information here, and I think Penny's going to post this so that you've got my contact information. And I don't know if we have room for or time for questions or not.
Are there any questions or a couple of these?
Yes.
I didn't hear whether there was a limit on the 140% of the units.
A limit on the rent?
No, of income, how many you should have in a project.
30% of the units have to have some kind of income and rent restrictions. And out of those 30%, it will probably be some kind of range where it may be some at 50% of area median income, it could be 80% of area median income, or it could be up to 140% area median income. In Don Sturhan's project, and you can visit with him about it, he proposed a project in Williston that was funded, 36 units, 18 of his units are going to be targeted for essential service workers. In his case, all 18 are targeted at 140% of AMI because we, a city, county, state employee may not be down at that 50% level. They may be closer to the 140%, but they still can't afford $3,000 a month rent. Yes?
So can a housing developer access both HIF and LIHTC?
Yes. Yes, if it's a LIHTC, if it's got federal tax credits in it, we limit them to $600,000. That's the max that we will put in there. One point I was going to make. This program is being seen as a tremendous success. One of the problems that we're going to have going into the next legislative session is there's all kinds of groups that are looking to access that fund for different activities. We've got a coalition out there that is looking to use HIF dollars for rental assistance. We've got another one out there that wants it to fund supportive services. And we have another group that is looking at using it to create affordable single-family home ownership. All worthy activities, but all of those are going to have their detractors. We've got that core group of legislators that like the program for creating bricks and mortar, and the more that you kind of put the different pork barrel things on there, the more potential, and this is my opinion, that I see for alienating legislators. So,
There's a question here.
Have you done any of the mixed rent with CDBG or home as part of the project?
yes, we use home and CDBG with our projects a lot. They typically use the CDBG for the infrastructure so it doesn't trigger the Davis-Bacon. Home dollars will come in, and the home administering agency watches it real close again, so they don't put too much home in, because we don't want to get back into that red tape again with the Davis-Bacon in Section 3.
Just a little off to the side. About 4 years ago, we looked into working in Minot, and property taxes, this is right before the flood, so it might have been 5 years ago. Property taxes for a 44-unit, 9% deal were almost the same as our mortgage payment. It would have been about $100,000 a year. To me, that's a deal killer before you even leave the office. Is there any, and there was even legislation or a lawsuit, I guess, at the Capitol over this matter, and the state won under supporting actually the idea of keeping these taxes into the stars. Have you any thoughts on that, or is there any progress being made on that front, or is it not just the exception, or?
No. Property taxes are a very big concern in the state, because with our escalating values of property, the taxes that went up along with it. There was a group, it was local housing authorities that introduced a bill in the last legislative session. We were very supportive of it, and I testified in support of that at the end of the legislative session. It was passed. It grants property tax relief to affordable housing projects owned by nonprofits that are subject to a deed restriction, and 3, that if their partnership agreement, now this is in the LIHTC world, if their partnership agreement says that that property is going to transfer to a for-profit at the end of 15 years, that's a deal breaker. But if it stays nonprofit owned, it qualifies for property tax relief for those units that are income and rent restricted. So if you have 100% income and rent restricted, you're going to qualify for property tax relief. It is based on 5% of the gross rents collected minus utilities paid by the owner. So that's what the taxation rate is. So they did get significant property tax relief.
Thank you.
One more question. Oh, 2.
Jolene, thank you for your excellent presentation. I think we have a lot we can learn from you. My question gets to people with disabilities living on fixed incomes, SSI income, about $7.11 a month. That's like 10 or 12% of median income. You're saying your rents are at 50% of median income. How do you fill those gaps?
The rents are at 50%. The income is at 50%. The rents are at 30%. So it is getting down to the very, very low income. So if you have got a $1,000 a month Social Security income, those rents on the 90-some units there are going to be capped at 30% of 30% of AMI, of HUD published. We use HUD published area median income limits.
And those lower, like SSI, it's $7.11 a month. What are you doing for those folks?
Well, they're gonna pay 30% of the 30% of AMI. If it's $711, we're not going to get down to 30% of $711. You know, our lowest rents are typically in that $350 range. Goes back to, you know, is there a case to be made for rental assistance? Can you qualify for a voucher? We've had some success in getting the housing authorities to project-based vouchers on some of our units.
Thanks so much.
I just have a quick question. How did you determine your top end of your how did you determine your top end? You said you could go up to 140% of AMI. How come not 150 or how come not 130? So what was the gauge to create that top end?
By statute, our agency has a mission and we can serve low to moderate income. We worked with our attorney and within the 140% was pretty much the maximum that our attorney felt we could go and still be considered moderate. You know, could you go to 150 or 160? Certainly, but we don't. We don't put state resources in if it goes above 140%.
Thank you, Jolene. Here's just a little appreciation.